Making a game competitive is the dream of most developers. It's a milestone most games will never reach, but those that do find a massive following to their game, with several fans wanting to join the competitive game scene and others watching, creating a continual flow of viewers, players, and pro gamers. But this is something almost unheard of in most MMOs. Sure, you can have teams utilize the fighting mechanics in a small arena and have that as a competitive portion of the game, but that ignores the rest of the game and isolates its player base to where only a small section can be competitive. But that's much easier when considering the Leviathan challenge it would be to make all aspects of the game competitive, like completing quests or simply leveling a skill. Which is exactly what RuneScape's Deadman mode manages to achieve, because it takes Oldschool Runescape and turns it into a competition by adding and blocking various things like items, activities, and most importantly it changes PvP, where in the base game PvP is only possible in minigames and in the wilderness. But in Deadman mode, PvP is always active, meaning that no matter where you are, you can always be attacked by another player, except for designated safe zones that are usually guarded by high-level NPCs. So it's an understatement when I say PvP plays a big part in Deadman mode, with it being active at all times and also being the endgame where the top 256 surviving players fight it out in intense 1v1 matches. But the end is just as interesting as the beginning, because just like in most competitions, anyone can attend, which is extremely important when making a competitive game, as you want it to be accessible by everyone. Most games do this by designing the game around a competitive format where the attraction to the game is a competitive nature and the general goal is to move up in rank, as there's very little drive to do much else. And that's what sets RuneScape apart from the other games, because sure, you can compete in the high scores if you're a competitive skiller or see how far you can make it as a hardcore Ironman. But the game has no clear goal, it's just progression, and that progression you keep, unlike the base gameplay of most competitive games where progression can be lost by losing a match or two. So having a competitive mode that constantly changes and a base game that saves progression is very much a positive. So even if you're a casual player that just likes to progress their account by skilling or just enjoys PKing, you are unintentionally refining your Deadman mode skills, which just makes it that much easier to get into. Because Deadman mode is not just about PvP. In fact, to qualify for the final, you had to be in the top 2,000 players from the seasonal, which is currently based on total level. So those that don't know how to train skills will have a much harder time finding placement than those that do. So after qualifying by being among the top 2,000 players from the seasonal, you will then be invited to the Deadman mode final that resets your stats once again and gives you 1 week to prepare. But there's a twist. Where the seasonal had several servers to host all of its contestants, the final only has one, meaning that resources are scarce and become even more competitive. So to gather supplies, you had to be way more resourceful than in the seasonal, which makes it that much more fun to watch, with the game ending in your typical battle royale gameplay, where within the final hours, dying means disqualification, and like a traditional battle royale, gas is released and shrinks the game world, forcing chaotic combat situations where in the end it's left up to the player's individual PvP skill and some RNG. So only the top player killers in the game can win this, right? Yes and no. And that's because of the various clans that compete in Deadman mode that split the top prizes should any member win, which has become a point of controversy, as you'd find it quite difficult to win Deadman if you were playing solo. Maybe even almost impossible, as you'd have to deal with clans locking down several locations or getting swarmed in uneven fights that you have no chance in winning. But the real controversy is with the accusations and strong evidence of some of these clans doing literally whatever it takes to get ahead of the competition, such as performing denial of service attacks against competitors, which flags them offline, making victory for these clans much easier. Even with these negatives, clans do have many positives, and the biggest one being that they allow everyone to compete. And I know it sounds contradictory when I just finished talking about how they affect solo players, but hear me out on this. Even if you're no good at PKing, you can still be a very useful asset. Let's say you're a skiller and you're no good at PKing. You can focus on leveling your gathering skills while most people are training their combat skills. With your towering skill level, you can gather high level supplies and resources that can make a big impact in early game and be very supportive during the late game. This applies to every other aspect of Deadman mode, quests, bossing, you name it. So although the end game is PvP, it's much easier to get there with the inclusion of supporting roles that also make it more accessible to newer players that are not Renaissance men or have the impression that Deadman mode is solely a PvP tournament. And now that you know the basics about Deadman mode, we can take a deeper delve into what else it achieves. Deadman mode is a RuneScape advertising machine. Where base old school gameplay might not be appealing for your average viewer, Deadman mode definitely is, with it boosting viewer counts on the old school section of Twitch to the front page. And that's because where most competitive game matches can last 5 minutes to a couple hours, this competition lasts weeks. That's a lot of time you can invest following your favorite streamer as they progress to the final hours and turn regular RuneScape gameplay into this kind of competition that has the same kind of following and devotion from fans that you would expect from a traditional sport. And for those that have never seen a Deadman mode stream, think about it like a typical RuneScape progress video, except it's happening live, the progress is sped up, and it's also combined with a PKing video, but unlike your traditional RuneScape Wilderness PKing that's already kinda suspenseful, Deadman mode creates an even more tense PvP environment, and people like it for the same reason they like the hardcore Iron Man version of RuneScape. It's because you have to be cautious with every encounter. You have no idea what waits for you on White Wolf Mountain or even at Barrows. The intensity scale is cranked up because unlike base RuneScape where there are virtually no repercussions for dying, in Deadman mode if you die to a player you lose the top 10 items in your bank, but not your safe deposit box where you can store a total of 10 non-stackable items that will not be lost, of course, unless you take them out. So because dying actually means something, your survival skills, just like in Iron Man, directly affect how you will do in the tournament. On the flip side, as a PKer, you have no idea what to expect from another player's bank chest. I've seen them range from a couple lobsters to millions of gold worth of supplies. This takes the intensity of Deadman mode and brings it up even further, as when you attack another player, you obtain a skull that lasts for 15 minutes. 2 minutes are added for every additional player attacked and will increase to 30 minutes if you attack a player 30 combat levels below you. And what this skull proudly parades is that you're unable to enter safe zones and teleporting will have a 7-second delay. It also displays the amount of keys you have on you with a cap set on 5 keys, which are dropped by defeated players and used to access their top 10 bank items. More keys means less inventory space, which means less supplies, which makes you easier to kill. And if someone does manage to kill you, they take your bank key along with all the ones you've obtained. And if this wasn't deterring enough, dying while skulled means you lose experience in non-protected skills. So you better hope that you survive your penalty skull. But ignoring the PvP side, my favorite aspect of Deadman mode is it takes the best part of the game and it essentially speeds it up, which is starting with a fresh account, and this happens every seasonal and every final. So in Deadman mode, players will always start with a new account that is at its base stats with a few tedious quests that are already marked as complete to make things a bit more accessible. That and a 5 times experience multiplier that is active at all times. There are also many rules in place that make it easy to get into, and one that's favorable for new or inexperienced players is that in the seasonal for 6 hours, you are immune to being attacked by players and all experience, including the bonus that you're already receiving, is doubled, so if you're new to the game, you can properly prepare yourself when PvP is finally active. And even if you don't want to play seriously, you can just try it out to enjoy being a noob again because most players don't play to win, they play because they genuinely enjoy the game mode. My evidence being that less than half of the qualifying players are actually playing during the final, as they most likely want to experience one of the best aspects of RuneScape all over again, which is, like I mentioned, the exponential progression of leveling skills and upgrading gear. Where even those players who detest scaling because of how much of a grind it can be to gain experience can have fun in this. It's just a massive refresher from the base game where gaining 1 agility level can take you several hours of grinding. But in Deadman mode, even though you won't be keeping your levels, as after the match ends all stats are wiped, you can take this opportunity to revisit lower level content that has been long forgotten, especially if you have a high level account in the base game that has been limited to the non-diverse high level scaling grind. In fact, Deadman mode is what got me into Oldschool Runescape, as like most others, I felt like starting a new account from scratch would be too much of a grind, and for the time being, I'd rather train my already established RuneScape 3 account. But after watching some of my favorite streamers compete in Deadman mode, I thought, why not? Membership is shared between Oldschool and RuneScape 3, and playing Deadman mode for a bit would give me some nostalgia. So I had nothing to lose, and I have to say, I was really taken by surprise how fun it was killing cows in Lumbridge, to training range with a bone crossbow at Green Dragons, and then saving up to get a runite crossbow. And all this was done within a couple hours. So if not for the competition, Deadman mode serves as a kind of demo for Oldschool Runescape and showcases the best part of both games, which is the grind. So if you're reluctant to trying Oldschool, especially if you play RuneScape 3, because like I said, membership is shared between both games, so you really have nothing to lose here. And who knows, it might bring you newfound interest in old school like it has with a lot of players. Where Deadman mode started off shaky and may have seen the same fate as Darkscape, through the rigorous refinement and feedback obtained from multiple seasons, it manages to amplify nearly every aspect of RuneScape and has succeeded in becoming accessible to every player, streamer, and viewer, and therefore it has become the ultimate MMO esport. This has been Deadman Mode, the ultimate competitive game. Thanks for watching.